And hello, my name is Martin, and today what we're going to do is we're going to be talking about the other half of collision settings. So in the previous tutorial, what we did was we talked about mobility and physics, right? And since the last tutorial, you'll notice there's been a couple of changes here to the platform, and I'll talk about that just in a minute. And what I did obviously was I went up here, I hit text, and I grabbed a text box, placed it here, and then just copied and pasted it down with the information that I needed. So basically what I'd like you to do is something like this, right? Where we talked about we would have this and then we'd have text in front of it. And then what I want you to do is at least in the first one, set this one up to where it's about mobility, the physics. I have this one set as green. I think it ended up being the stone one. I think the stone one also was the one that we went through and did a couple of changes to the physics where we changed, let's say, the angular dampening and the linear dampening to see different things happen, at least the way it was affected with gravity. So maybe we say that the white one is, what was it, like 100 kilograms, the checkerboard one, which is this one down here, I guess it was the red one, and we'll say that one was 500 kilograms, and then we'll say that the stone one was 1,000 kilograms and linear dampening at 20, angular dampening at 20. So you know, the different things that you did to each one of the stones, right? And it doesn't have to necessarily look like this. I'm just sort of like putting bullet points up there with data. You can have something that's more complex, that has more information on it, or whatever you want to do. Just make sure that as I play the game, when I walk up to it, it's legible and I don't have to like walk right next to it to get it to be able to see it. So that's sort of why this one's a little bit smaller, because there was less information that I needed on there. This one is going to be a bit taller. Again, I don't want it to be so tall that I have to like look up to be able to see it, right? With this one, you can already see that we've got a couple of conditions that we're going to set up. So let's go ahead and start. And what we're going to do is, again, we're just going to grab a couple of cubes, put them out on the floor. Oops. I don't know if it's the cold or if the battery's dying in my mouse, but it has been a pain. Oh, it's because all that stuff was selected. Let's do that. Let's hit end. There we go. It's like all of a sudden it like loses track of what it's holding on to and tries to grab the thing in the background. Anyways. Okay, so there's the 3 boxes that we need. Just shift all of them over into the corner, and then that way we'll see the information that we have up there. So what I'm going to do to these boxes is pretty much what we did so far to these, right? So I'm going to go in, I'm going to change their mobility settings, and I'm also going to change their physics so that they will react to something, because remember, as they come in, they're not going to react to anything. So I do have them all 3 selected. Let me see if I can hit mobility on all of them. It looks like I was able to. From there, let's apply physics. Let's make them all 500, because I sort of like the way the weight works on the 500. Okay, and I'm going to leave this stuff alone for now. So now we have pretty much exactly what we did to the boxes over here done over here, right? So the mobility has been made movable and the physics has been enabled, and now we need to talk about the next thing. So if we close the physics box, the next box or the next group of options that we have just underneath that is going to be collision settings. And inside collision settings, what I really want to point out is that what the collision settings do is they create 3 categories: an ignore, a overlap, and a block. And what those do is they tell this object how to register information, whether it be gravity or physics or what they're calling up here a hit or an overlap event, right? So the event being something that happens, and the overlap being the fact that both of the objects were able to occupy the same space. So the hit would happen on a block, the overlap would happen on an overlap, and the ignore, you're ignoring it, so you're not trying to register anything like physics or lighting or try to attach it to an event, so then that way you can write code for it. So at that point, when you hit ignore, there's not another option up there for that. So from there, the next thing to sort of understand, well, the next option that we have, well, let me back up. There is a physics override material, and this is a little bit more complex, but this would allow for something to act differently in the material. So like, let's say you needed something that floated versus something that sank. You might use a material to create, I don't know. Anyways, like I said, more complex than what we want to get into for right now. Right now, we just want to look at the other options that we have, and we can do plenty with that, trust me. So from there, the next thing, or the next question is, can the character step on this? So can I, as a character, once this thing gets knocked over, or even as it is now, can I use it to step on? If I can, I'm going to leave this checked. If not, I'm going to leave it no, right? And we'll get back to owner later. For right now, just leave it as yes, because that's the default. That's normally what it's set to. From there, the next thing that we have is the collision presets. Now, inside of Unreal, they have given you a list of different combinations of ways that you can combine these, what are called object responses, and naming of this object in different categories. So right now, let's say this box I have labeled as no collisions. When I do that, you'll see that the information in the boxes below have changed, right? So the check marks are showing up in different places. Don't worry about what they're doing now. Just realize that that's, you know, when you pick a preset, that's what you're doing. You're picking a group of a certain object type, a certain collision enabled scenario, and then how it's going to respond to other objects inside the world that have different labels, right? So, and you know, we can have one of these as block all. I can have this one as it's still a physics actor. I can have it set to default where it's really just doing nothing. Let's go back to, let's say, custom. And okay, so one way to use this would be to set up a object type, which is basically a class. And in that class, what you're doing is you're basically giving this thing a label, right? So this box is on the team called block all. That block all really is just a placeholder. It could literally be anything. It could be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It doesn't matter. All that's going to be is the name of the preset, right? And from there, I get to make these options, right? So basically, if I have this box up here, which is labeled block all, and it is labeled as an object type world static, and then I have this one down here, which is custom and world static. Well, there's still, even though this one's custom and this one is still a preset, they are still on the same team. They are still on world static. So when we click on world static, we look that we have, these are the different quote unquote teams that we can play on, right? So we've got world static, world dynamic, pawn, physics body, vehicle, and destructible. And like I said, this could be gobbledygook. It doesn't matter as long as you know that it's just a label and it doesn't necessarily mean anything else. It's just a label. So there, from there, as long as they're playing on the same team, unless we've made any changes to how the custom one is going to react maybe to the people on its own team, they should interact the same way, right? So that's basically the whole gist of this, is putting an object on the floor, making, let's say, putting this to custom. Let's make it, actually, you know, let's do it as a block all. Let's make this one a block all. Let's make this one a block all. Okay, so with what I've done, basically what I'm saying is that the preset that I've picked is block all. The object type is a world static, so this is the same team that everybody's playing for, and that it's going to block anything that is labeled a world static, a world dynamic, a pawn, a physics body, or vehicle, or whatever, right? So if we push play now and we see what this looks like, let's go ahead and push play. So I'm going to walk up to the object, and I am indeed being blocked by it, right? I cannot go through the object. I can manipulate it, I can push it, right? Now that also brings into question the fact that, well, maybe I have collision settings, right? Because I must be labeled as something, and that something is being blocked by the collision settings that we're using, right? So let's take a look at that real quick. Ourselves, the first person player, is going to be under content. It's going to go all the way back to your content folder and go to first person player and go into blueprints, right? So we're in content, first person blueprints, or first person BP, and then blueprints. BP standing for blueprints. And there we actually see the first person character and we see the first person projectile. So unlike these, I can't actually select, let's say, the projectile, because the projectile doesn't exist. I could select the first person player and from there scroll down and possibly get into, and I don't think you can actually get into it from here. Let's see the collision settings. Yeah, there's something else. We'll explain this later. But if I wanted to get to the actual collision settings, I would have to double click into the blueprint for each one of these objects, so then that way I can see how and what it's colliding with. So let's do that with the first person projectile first. So when I double click it, it's going to open up the information or the blueprint for this object. Let me zoom out a bit so we can see what we've got. And basically this is the information about how it's being shot and how it's showing up and how it's moving, right? That's the code that's been written for it. The other thing would be in the viewport. So what we'll see is we have 3 tabs. We have construction scripts, which we'll talk about later. We may end up making one if you do some of the special labs at the end. I don't think for the regular course we're doing anything with construction scripts. Maybe not. I don't know. I'm thinking health bar, but I don't think we need one. So the event graph, the construction script, and the viewport. And the viewport is actually the object itself. It's the mesh, the ball that shows up. And the other thing that we see is that we have what's called a collision component. So this is actually an invisible sphere around the object, the mesh, which is actually also got collision settings. This is called a collision component. So we would assume that it would have collision settings. So if we have that selected and we scroll down far enough, sure enough, there's physics, which we don't have to worry about because some of that's being taken care of here. And we also, some of it is being taken care of there in the projectile information. So we don't have to apply physics to the outer shell, the outer invisible shell. It would be applied to the object, not the shell. Anyways, I digress. So what we're looking for is collision settings. So here, again, look what it's labeled. The team that this object is playing for is pawn, right? It is ignoring anything that is labeled pawn, so it can't hit itself. And the other thing is that, let's see, it's blocking everything else, right? So it's ignoring pawns, but it's going to block everything else. So it's going to interact with everything except other things labeled as pawn. Interestingly, if we go to our first person character and double click, and we double click to open him, there we go. And there's the code for how the first person player is moving. We can see things like spawning projectile, mouse movement, stick. If you had a joystick, it would work with it. This is the movement, and this one of these I think is the heads up. Oh, we don't have a heads up display yet. All right, but we also have a viewport, and in that viewport we also have a capsule component, and that capsule component, if selected and scroll down to, you can get to its collision settings, and guess what? It is also labeled as a pawn. But even though it's a pawn, it's let's see, it has pawn blocked, so that means if a ball hits us, it's going to bounce off of us, right? Because the other ones are labeled as pawns, and it's blocking everything else. So we are indeed being that's the reason why when we run into the box, we are exerting force on it, because the capsule component is creating a barrier around us, this capsule, this elongated circle that has essentially what would be like an invisible force field. So it's pushing because it's being told to, on its surface, block anything else that is also labeled basically as anything else in the game. So we are going to interact with everything. We can't walk through anything. We are going to be blocked by everything. So let's have some fun with that. Let's go to the first person projectile, and let's go to the I also want to check the sphere, because sometimes the sphere does. Okay, so it doesn't have collisions. It has no collisions. Okay, so this is good. And we're going to do the same thing to the capsule component. We're going to set it, let's say, from custom to no collisions. So we're actually using a preset now, right? Now, once we've done that, you'll notice that we've lost our check mark up here at the top. You do need to compile. So we're going to click there, and we'll get our check mark back if everything is good. So far, all we did was change something that was a preset, so we're fine. And then once we've done it, we always want to hit save just to make sure that it's there. So once we're done, we're going to minimize this screen. And now, when we shoot at these, we should have no collision. So let's go ahead and push play. And I'm going to walk over to these guys. And notice indeed that not only is my ball going through these guys, but it's also going through everything, right? And the reason why it's going through everything is because basically we said no collisions. So let's say we want to set up the situation where we do want our ball, the Nerf balls, the projectiles to be blocked. You know, obviously we want them to stay in the game. We just don't want them to go through those things. So let's go back. And we're going to go to the first person projectile again. Double click to open it. And here, instead of no collisions, let's go to custom, because we're going to make a change to it. And right now, it does say block all, and it's labeled as a world static. So let's put this back to a pawn, which is what we had it before. And we are going to say that with things labeled, let's say we're gonna end up naming those other things vehicles, right? So I'm going to say that this is not. It's going to ignore anything labeled vehicle. So we've made that change. We now have to go up to compile and save. You're gonna get so used to hitting compile. And now what I want to do is I want to switch these from saying from what they were labeled as before to label them as vehicle, right? So right now they're in a preset called block all. So I'm going to switch that to custom, and then we're going to tell this thing to no longer be a world static. We want you now to switch teams and play for the vehicles, right? So we're going to do that to all of them. We're going to go to custom, and we're going to switch this to vehicle. And then we're going to go up to the top one and do the same thing. So custom vehicle. All right. So theoretically, at this point, this has been told to block everything, even pawns. Our projectile is labeled as a pawn. So we may still be blocked even though the projectile is correct. The object over here, these individual objects, because they're customs, are being told to block everything, even projectiles. So let's do a quick save, and save all down here, and let's push play and see what happens. So, oh, seems like I'm still going through things. Okay. Let's see if we get this guy fixed up. So let's go here. Let's go to collision settings. This is set to... Oh, we still have no collisions enabled. Yay. Let's put this to... I'll explain this in just a moment, but for right now, let's just put it on collisions enabled, query, and physics. And then that way it will actually generate both a registration of the fact that it hit and the fact that it's going to apply physics to the object that it hit. So let's hit compile and save. And that should now do it. Well, actually, we may still be blocked. But I don't think there we go. So balls are staying now in the game. And they're bouncing off of the back wall. But they're going through these boxes. Okay, so the ball is overriding the object. Ah, that's so much fun. Okay, so in this situation, because we have those conditions now, we will say that the boxes are labeled as movable. They could move if they wanted to, right? So we have movable. The physics is enabled, right? So we look down at the physics, and we did enable the physics. Maybe there, if you wanted to, you could have an extra column on how much weight you gave them or whatever, but that's fine. And then the collision presets, what we did was we set this to custom, and then from there the object type is set to vehicle, so I don't have that information written, so let me go ahead and do that. So I'm going to select the A. Oh, these are all in a group, so let me ungroup them. I was doing that so I could move stuff around. Oh, come on. Where's the top of this thing? There we go. Okay, so let me see what group they belong to. There they are. Okay, so I think I got it now. So collision's enabled, and I think we said this was a vehicle. Oh, no, okay. Collisions enable is something else. That was going to be the, so it's query and physics. I'm dyslexic, so y'all don't laugh at me if this comes out wrong. Okay, so we got query and physics. That does end up going back there. And then we have object type, and the object type was vehicle. So we'll select that. We'll go vehicle. And how is it interacting with, let's say, the world statics? So in this case, it's blocking. With a pawn. Gonna block. Oh no, with the, well, the object is blocking. We'll maybe make it go in there and say that it'll ignore pawns, because right now we've done that actually to the ball. We haven't actually done it to the bricks. So let's go ignore. So it's going to ignore pawns. And I have one on here labeled projectile. For right now, I'm just actually going to delete that, because we'll talk about how to set up your own groups later. There is actually a way to have way more than just world static, pawn, destructible. You can actually create your own and give it its own. So you can create your own presets, basically is what I'm saying. So we'll maybe do that in a different video. For right now, I just want to get through this. Let's go back to the projectile. We don't want it to ignore vehicles. We want it to block them. And we'll go ahead and hit compile and save. And let's go back to these guys. And instead of blocking the projectiles, we will ignore them. So now we're switching the roles, right? Before, it was the projectile that was ignoring the boxes because they were labeled as vehicle, and this was told to ignore them. That's why they were passing through. And in this case, we are now switching that back to this is supposed to be blocking anything labeled vehicle, but now we're going to tell the boxes to ignore anything labeled as pawn. So if we do that, we're going to hit ignore. We're going to go this guy, hit ignore for the pawn, go to this one and go ignore for the pawn. Right? So now all three of those would be ignoring anything labeled as pawn. So let's do a save, and play. So indeed they are being blocked. And now we're getting the same interaction, right? Now, the other thing too is because I am labeled as a pawn, can also just walk right through that, right? So if there was like a secret room or something that you wanted to like hide, and you wanted to make something look like it was a wall, but it's like a faux wall and they can just like walk right through it, that'd be a way to do it. Anyways, so interesting. So that's what we're going to end up doing. So what I would want you to do now would be to create another stack of 3, put it over here, and give it slightly different settings, and see what kind of different interesting things you can come up with. So for example, we'll just do another one real quick. So with this one, we had that set of settings. Oh, and we also need to talk about query and physics. So let's do that with the next set. So we'll do this very quick. We'll just set up another box. Okay, so let's say this time, let's see the kind of effect that we want. Let's make them, I know what we'll do. We'll do something like this. Okay, so what I'm going to do with those 3 is I'm actually going to leave them as mobility static, and I'm not going to enable physics, and I'm going to leave the collision settings on collision settings. Let's see what we'll do with the collision settings. Where'd they go? There they are. So instead of default, let's make it a block all. Okay, so we'll go up here now, and well, first let's play the thing and see what kind of effect we get, right? So let's push play, and cool. So now we get gravity defining boxes, right? And also ones that I can walk on, right? So now I've created like a sort of like a little platform, and I might jump from there to create some kind of other deal, right? And you can do that with any static. So any static you can just grab, suspend it in the middle of the air, and do something like that. So in this case also, let's just push play real quick, and let me just verify that it is indeed blocking my projectiles, and then indeed myself, because I was able to walk on it, right? So in this case, we would say that the mobility, where's the text? So we're going to call this static. We're going to say that physics is disabled. We're going to go into custom and call it block all. We're going to say that collisions is enabled. Collision enabled. And we're going to say this is query and physics. And again, hope I have spelled that right. Okay, so query and physics. What does that mean? Martin's already written it twice and he hasn't explained it yet. So let's go ahead and talk about it, right? So query and physics. When I grab any mesh that has collision settings, one of the options that I have there, and let me just make this guy custom first. You know what? We'll just go to this guy because he's already a custom. So one of the options that I have there is collisions enabled, and really I have 4 distinct possibilities. And basically what's happening here is that if we have it at no collisions, we are saying that we, regardless of the settings that we have and what this object type is called and all that other stuff, that we don't want it to interact with anything else. So no collisions will be either recorded, and there will be no physics added to it, right? So the query is a data point, basically. It basically says if this object is touched, or if the query is if, right? So if this object is either like what we have up there, right, generates a hit or generates an overlap, then we're going to create a data point which either gives us a yes or a no, right? From there we have physics, which we've already seen, which is the kilograms that we've added to things, the dampening that we've the linear or angular dampening that we've done to it, the fact that we have collision settings and we can obviously bump into things, right? So if we have so the options that we have there are no on both, right? So it's not going to record the query and it's not going to record the physics, which is the no collision. Then you're going to have the query only, where it's going to record the information, right? So maybe you bump into something, but you're not supposed to move it. Like there's not supposed to be any physics involved with it. Like let's say a trigger box. A trigger box doesn't have any physics. It's a volume, an invisible volume that allows for a blueprint to be added to it, that at that point all you have to register is the fact that your character ran into it, but there is no force will be applied to your character, and your character won't apply any force to it. An example of this would be, let's say you create a trigger box in front of a door, and every time you get to the door, if you don't have the key, it gives you like a buzzer sound, because you've attached to that overlap event a sound to play, right? So that's how that's going to work. So that's where you might use a query only, where you don't have to be also, there'd be no physics that would be applied. The other one would be physics only, right? So in this case, you're going to bump into it, but you don't need to register it as anything. It's not going to damage you. You're not attaching any code to it. Maybe it's a chair and you can just push the chair and the chair does nothing, right? Like it's not going to hurt you because you're pushing the chair. So at that point you might apply physics to it, but you're not necessarily trying to generate a overlap event or generate a hit from it, right? It doesn't count as anything. You're not trying to query it for data. And then the last one is collisions enabled, which means that you have both the query and the physics. So in that situation, you are trying to collect information from that data point. Did we overlap, or did we block each other? In which case, did we generate a hit, or did we generate a hit event or an overlap event? And in that case, send the information down to the rest of the blueprint to let it know this happened, and then also apply whatever physics have been added to either the the mesh, or our character, or the projectile, right, that we've been shooting. So that's what those mean. That's why they're important, because they can definitely override certain things, and they will allow certain things to happen and other things not to happen, right? So if you accidentally, let's say, want one of these boxes to generate damage on you, on your character, but you have no collision set, guess what? It's not going to create that damage. In this case, maybe you bump into it, and well, anyways, yeah, if you have it as no collision. So you do need to be careful as far as, that's a good example. We don't have to have multiple examples. A collision enabled would be used. So what I want you to do is just exactly like we did, right? So we'll come up here, we will go to this, and we will start writing what each one of these things are. I think this was labeled as a world static, so we'll just go in here and finish this off. So world static, let's see, where's the text? Okay. Then we'll go, how does it react with a world static? With other world statics, it's going to block. How is it reacting to the pawn? Because that's us. It's also going to block. And if you have something else, you can put, more information there. That's all I need. Those are the main things that I want you to focus on, right? So again, we are going to create, let's say the first one is going to be just physics. and you'll write down the name of whatever material you know, a green one, a white one, a blue one, a black one, a red one, whatever, and then write the weight in kilograms for 2 of them, and then play around with one of theirs, one of the angular, and then the different dampeners that were there. And then on the consequential ones, right? So let's just say 5 to 6 for sure. And you'll create the same thing, a copy of the platform, the 1, 2, 3 objects, the 3 static mesh boxes, and then you'll click on them, go through, adjust the mobility, the physics, the collision preset, what it's registering as far as it's collision enabled, and then what you've labeled them in as, what team they are playing for, and then how they interact with other objects. And then this way, when you actually do your walkthrough, you'll be able to walk up to the box, sit there, show me what the box says, and then do whatever, you know, show me the example of that. Then walk up to this one and show me, you know, it says physics are enabled, they're movable, query, custom, ignore, they're ignoring pawns. Okay, and this one, for blocking, the point would be to show me that it's a floating one and that it's working the way, and this is why it's working that way. And so you'd pause there for just a second and then just show me. And so 5 to 6 of those, and that's pretty much it. So let's just do a very quick recap. In the first video, what we did was we saw the way that mobility and physics can change an object. In the second video, what we learned is that each one of these meshes has the ability to be labeled, and once it's labeled, it works in relationship to one of 3 conditions. Either it's ignoring other things that are labeled whatever, or it's blocking them, or it's overlapping with them. Those will then create and generate overlap and hit events that we can then create and attach code to, so that'll be coming later. But for right now, what we want to do is get used to putting meshes out on the floor, adjusting that set of information for the mesh, so then that way we can create different interactions between us and other objects, right? Either lack of interaction, no interaction again, or controlled interaction, because now we know how to control those settings. And that's available for each mesh. So 5 examples, write the information down, try to find unique things like this, you know, different situations like that, and you should be fine. So that's collision settings. I hope you've enjoyed the video and have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.